Welcome, welcome, and we are live at the Neurodiversity in Education Conference, day 2. So today we have panelists of teachers and former teachers sharing their experiences as neurodivergent educators. So I'll just start off by introducing myself. I am Dr. Anne-Marie O'Dwyer. I am one of the co-directors of Neurodiversity in Education. I also taught for 11 years in the further education sector as a sociology teacher. So I'm going to hand over to the panel now for them to introduce themselves. I'm just going to do it in order as I can see it on the screen. So I'm going to start off with Dr. Amy Spatz.
Hi, I don't know where to start. Suddenly feel a bit frozen. I teach communication skills in a medical school, and I teach psychology, and I've recently finished my PhD, focusing on interpersonal mindfulness and empathy and early trauma. And so I do some self-directed work and some academic work within institutions in higher education.
Great, thank you, Amy. And Ruth.
Hiya, so I'm Ruth, and I'm an English teacher and a middle leader. So I work in private education, and before that, I did the Teach First programme back in 2008, and so I've spent many years in the state system and internationally as well. And I'm really interested in ADHD and UDHD in particular.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ruth. And Pete.
Hi, everyone. I'm Pete Warmby. I'm autistic, ADHD. I'm an author primarily these days, but I taught for 15 years in the private and state sector. Between 2008 and 2021 or something, maybe 13, 14 years. I worked as an English teacher. I was head of department for a while as well. But these days I'm out of the classroom and I do mostly training and talks and speeches and that kind of writer stuff that you do.
Great, thanks, Pete. And my co-director, Isaac.
Hi, I'm Isaac. I'm one of the co-directors of Neurodivergent in Education. I'm also a teacher, still currently a teacher. Before that, I worked in retail for over 20 so years in stores such as Hugo Boss, Ralph Lauren, Toys R Us, Hamleys, Nike, Gap, quite a few stores, managing stores in central London and across the country. I'm also a ADHD coach. So I did my ADHD course with ADHD Works, and also a football coach. So I coach for an academy in Kent where we take kids who are quite talented and they play against Tottenham, Arsenal, Chelsea, Brighton, that kind of stuff. So I work with a lot of kids with football. Also, I'm a business teacher. That's my field of trade. Coming from retail management, I went into teaching just over 6 years ago and became a business teacher. I love what I do. I love my training, my teaching. I was previously head of house, but I felt that basically the work that I really wanted to do was more supporting with students with challenges, ADHD in particular, and dyslexia. I am dyslexic and ADHD. So as my 5 children are neurodiverse, my wife is neurodiverse, my brothers and sisters are neurodiverse. So I've got a lot of lived experience in that field. And part of what I try and do in school is work alongside the SEN team, parents and students. So I have a parent meeting group, which I'm hosting one next week for the New Year 7s for their parents and to show that what we can support in school with their kids, as well as doing CPDs for the teachers, to get teachers to understand what ADHD is, what dyslexia is, what neurodiversity is, and how we can use it in the classroom, how we can understand it and help our students better. Apart from that, I'm doing my behavior course in MPQ LBC, so I'm a specialist in behavior as well. Quite a lot. ADHD, we do quite a lot. We're always doing something. So yeah, literally, I'm always busy. But that is a bit about me.
Yeah, thank you, Isaac. And Georgia.
Hi, I'm Georgia. I work in mainstream education. I've been working for over 15 years in the state sector. I'm formerly in London, and now I'm in the heady heights of sixth form education, which is wonderful, working with 16 to 18-year-olds. Former head of year, head of history department, and I've recently stepped out of head of history into a new role that my workplace has just put together, which we've called lead learning support teacher, which essentially means I'm a bridge teacher between the learning support department and teachers at the college. So I work with teachers here to work to support students who are neurodivergent in the classroom. I have lived experience, family experience, lots of experience, starting with dyslexia diagnosed at university, and then the tumbling out from that of other diagnoses since.
Brilliant. Okay. Thank you all. So to all those that are watching and those who will be watching on catch up, I've got some questions I'm going to pose to the panel, and like all good practice, they've seen the questions in advance, but you are welcome to provide questions, in the live stream. So we're quite happy to take some of those, and we're just going to start off with something nice and easy. In terms of thinking about, as neurodivergent teachers, how do we think our neurodivergence has shaped our teaching, our research, philosophy and approach to education? So I'm going to start off with Georgia.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. I think when I went into teaching straight off on my training, I really felt so strongly that students needed clear boundaries. I felt so strongly that my classroom needed to be a safe place. I had very clear systems for meeting students at the door. So it was always the same each week, that they knew when they came into my classroom what my rules and my expectations were. I wanted that. For me, what I come back to over and over again is my space safe? Do students know where to sit, whatever system it is that I'm using? Do they know what the work is? Do they know what to do when they come in? And lesson planning, really clear lesson planning. I felt that was a strength right from the start. And I never quite understood why I was so clear on my lesson planning, clear starter, chunked lesson very carefully with very clear movement between lessons, with a clear finish at the end. I didn't want students to ever feel, is the lesson finished? Am I going to go now? Or, what do I do when I come in? I want students to feel safe. And that approach to my teaching has followed me through. Became a parent whilst I was a teacher and continued that focus on boundaries, routines, consistency and clarity. And I think I'd like to say that my students now would say they feel safe in my classroom, that they know who they are, they know they can trust me, they can be open with me. And I think that's my main thing is routine, consistency and clarity. I do think that comes from a place of neurodiversity. I do think that need and desire for organisation in the world, and a world that is chaotic and confusing for us, that we've built in our own systems ourselves. And so I feel like I mirror that onto my lessons. That's what I feel. That's me. That's Georgia.
Yeah, excellent. I love that, those examples there in terms of creating our own path and our own way, which we've had to do. Certainly, I know my own experience of education and in research. Ruth, can you resonate with that?
Yeah, I mean, I love what you just said. And I think as well, building on that idea of high expectations, and I'm really passionate about that. I think that we have to expect a lot from young people, because otherwise they'll do the minimum, and that's, the same whatever your setting is. But I do think it's important to set out, the high expectations for neurodivergent learners as well, and say, actually, you can do this. So yeah, I love what you just said. I think for me as well, just thinking about metacognition, because I don't actually have an English degree. I've got a history degree and a history master's. And so when I did teach first many years ago, I was having to learn content and then really break it down and try and get my head around what it was that I was going to teach and then how I was going to teach it. And back at the time, I didn't know that I was going to be, partway on a journey towards an ADHD diagnosis at nearly 40. So I just, that was my way of working, and I had to think, what am I learning? How am I going to break that down? But actually going through those processes, and particularly teaching explicitly, this is a strategy that you need to use to manage this content. I just always done that. And my school has a brilliant CPD program under an amazing deputy head that we've got. And last year there was a big push on metacognition. And I think that's when I started to go, oh yeah, like I do this already. I've always done this, but this really does help all pupils, but especially pupils that need to be really reflective and to develop those strategies. So that's sort of my favourite thing, really. Loads of reflection, especially for the pupils who are really quite bad at it. And it supports those executive functions, organisation, task initiation, self-regulation. So they sort of really marry up.
That's great. And then just thinking about that, so we're looking at how our neurodivergence, how we use that effectively in terms of carving out our own way. We think then moving on to what challenges have you guys faced as neurodivergent educators, researchers, and writers even, Pete? I'd be interested to know about that, seeing as I want to take up that mantle. But I'm going to go over to Isaac first. So what challenges have you faced as a neurodivergent educator and researcher?
I would say, starting off from when I was in retail management, before I became a teacher, I used to be a coach for GAP, so coaching managers. So part of my job for GAP and for TM Lewin was a manager trainer. So going to stores and help train supervisors, managers, how to manage stores. And I felt that the challenge I had was trying to remember things. I always forgot what I was supposed to do, so I had to write everything down. I always remembered that I always used to spelling and that and maths was quite difficult for me. So the numbers, so that was difficult for me off the top of my head. But I never knew quite why. So I was always sort of behind my peers when it came to getting promotions and that kind of stuff, because I wasn't always quite put together as much as other people. I didn't have the strategies or didn't understand why my brain worked a certain way. And it's not until I was doing a lot of work with my wife, who is an SEN specialist, and then my son, and how he was struggling at school and the things he was struggling with at school. I said, you know what? I actually struggle with those as well. And it got my mind back to when I was a child. And when I came to England, I was born in Nigeria. When I came to England, I was fostered, and I was fostered to a white family. And that really sort of, I think, looking back at it, messed up my mind a bit as well. So there's a lot of things where I'm looking back at how did I navigate my life, my world, and how I understood things was a challenge. So when it came to thinking about becoming an educator, so it got to when I was 40, and my wife said to me, look, you're always about at work, teaching people, going to stores, opening, closing stores. You don't see your kids that much. So I ended up going into education because I can spend the same holidays with my children and my wife, that kind of stuff. And I had to decide what type of work I'll do as an educator. So my degree is in architecture, nothing to do with business. Just like Ruth, I haven't got a degree in business, but my life skills in business helps me with my job. So talking about how the challenge I have, I was challenged by learning new things. So metacognition, learning the processes and all the fundamentals of business, to how to express that and explain it to students. But I found that actually, if I do it the way I know, I can understand it. And then when I say it to the students, they get it. So I broke things down, and that's chunking, which I didn't really get before. That's how my brain works. I've got to separate things and like bullet note points, that kind of stuff. Use the whiteboard a lot and note things down. So when I do my lessons, what I've learned, the challenge I've had with spelling and cognition, I said to myself, you know what? Some of my students have the same issues. Because I taught year 7, ICT, art, and ICT, art, and I think computing. And then I taught upper years, which is business studies and finance, for year 10, 11, 12, 13. And I said to myself, okay, fine. All these children learn in different ways, just like me. So I've got to now think about what kids are in my class. So the challenge I faced was reading ages, was EAL, was backgrounds in where they lived, because I grew up in East London. So all those things came into my teaching. So I had to understand how to work with different types of kids. And I think on your sheet here it says declaring your neurodivergence. I felt I had to do that. So I then actually, when I have my lessons, I say, you know what, guys, my name's Mr. Kinde. I'm a business teacher. I'm not quite the normal teacher, as you might gather as we go along, but I might make a few mistakes. I might make a few spelling mistakes. I've got ADHD, dyslexia. That is me. Let's work forward. And they accepted that. And when I get in trouble, in a sense, as we call it, good trouble, as my wife calls it, in class, like, sir, you've missed out that. Oh, yeah, don't worry, John. We'll get that sorted out. So they sort of embrace getting things wrong. And I think we've got to help students understand that getting things wrong isn't always bad. You learn from mistakes, and I can learn from them. So some of the challenges I had was actually metacognition, getting to understand how to chunk things and get things made simpler so people can understand. But then also on the other part of that is stretch and challenge. I've got to understand that other students in the class may not be neurodiverse, may just want to get on with it. So I had to understand that, just like Ruth said, my lesson had to be structured in a way that I was able to manage those who needed support, but also stretch those who were very intelligent and bright. So my lessons are very managed, organized. I spend the night working through my PowerPoint and then like using bold words and using pale colors for those who got early ins, that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of things I do, just the challenge I have to make sure my students don't have issues in my class. I'm not sure if that's clear enough, but that's how I sort of do things.
Yeah, that's great. That was a lot. Yeah, really comprehensive, Isaac. And Amy, I'm interested then from a researcher point of view, what sort of challenges have you, or if there have been challenges?
Well, quantitative research was quite straightforward, and I liked all the rules and the kind of the clarity for it. You ask a question, you predict something, you bring ideas down from the previous research, and then you make an idea and you try and prove if that's right or wrong, if that's the way it works or that's the way it doesn't work. But then I found that very restrictive to, you know, what you could learn about everyone's ideas and feelings about, well, because I was researching mindfulness, and this was before I realized I was neurodivergent, actually, because I only realized last year that I was neurodivergent. But when it came to the qualitative, you know, interviewing, I love talking. That's why I teach communication skills. I love listening. I'm, you know, completely fascinated, and I think that came from my many challenges with communication. You know, completely fascinated about how people interact with one another, how they feel before, after, during, all those things. And when I was trying to understand people's experiences with mindfulness, having interviewed them at great length and really enjoyed those incredible, rich conversations, I found it really difficult to get clear on what was going on. There was so much information, and I needed to be very specific. So I think I took an extra long time to analyze my interviews, but then it's possibly the case, although I don't want to, you know, I don't want to sound extra, but it does seem like I got more insight in the end through all the work I was willing to put into understanding those complicated experiences, where I've got really sort of nuanced ideas that I'm not sure would have been picked up from someone who hadn't already had similar challenges to me. Yeah, so
Yeah.
it kind of goes with the strengths. It goes with, you know, it's all sort of intertwined.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's great. I found something very similar when I was carrying out my own research, actually, because I did qualitative, and so there was like 14 sides. It was something like 120 hours that I had of transcription. and then trying to recall all of that. And I feared that, I'd have, because of executive dysfunction, which I hate that term, but I was concerned about, would I be able to recall? And so I created my own structure, so basically my own methodological process. And because of that, I'd be able to reel off my data. If you said, what did participant I say, I'd be able to tell you. So I think we kind of find our own ways. There's not enough, which I need to do, there's not enough papers out there from neurodivergent academics talking about how they, how they've navigated the process that is the neuronormative. And Pete, I'm really interested because I want to embark on this. So this slightly is a selfish proposition, but I'm interested in terms of what challenges have you faced as a neurodivergent writer and as educator writer in terms of and how have you navigated them?
Yeah, I mean, very different challenges in the two jobs. I mean, looking back at education, looking back when I was a teacher, my main challenge was anxiety. Just trying to control my overwhelming anxiety every single day was quite nightmarish at times. I would, have the class outside waiting to come in, and I would be racked with an anxiety that was hard to pin down, related to social anxiety, worrying about what the students would do, what they would say, how they might, challenge in their own way, anxious about the work that I'd set up for them, anxious about the fact that I hadn't managed to do the marking because I can't focus for any amount of time on anything that's even remotely boring. I just can't do it. I really, which doesn't help with the writing either. So that was a primary issue really with teaching. There was just too much anxiety there, and of course there wasn't enough in terms of people or systems in place to help somebody who was, autistic without knowing it, racked with this terrible anxiety and depression as well. There was just, this was back in 2016, 2015. There was no real impetus to try and work through that with somebody who was embarking at the very beginning of embarking on their journey to discover their neurotype. But that's not me anymore. I do things differently now. In terms of writing, the way that it's ADHD mostly with the writing. I would love to be able to say that the autistic part of my brain takes over and I sit down and I write for hours and hours and hours, but that has literally never happened. I've never managed to unlock that. I can play video games for hours and hours and hours, but for some reason I can't write. I write in 10-minute bursts of hyperactivity where I'll get maybe, I don't know, half a page to a page written, just like this. And then I'll have to go away and do something else. And then eventually I will come back to it and I will edit it a little bit and then kind of carry on. But it's, I am not the poster child of quality writing practices. The way I write is incredibly disorganized and just probably not the right way to do it. But I'm happy. I own it. It's the way I do it. I wrote both of my books on my phone, mostly, with my finger. I can't type. I'm not a typer like this. I'm a two first finger typer. So yeah, both my books were typed in that way, usually lying on the sofa after everyone had gone to bed. So yeah, I mean, I suppose if that teaches you anything, yeah, you can read. If I can do that, then anyone who's capable of sitting at a computer and actually writing something properly, you can definitely write. You'll be fine.
Yeah, I love that. My little thing is not gameplay. It's like looking at dog memes with my dog sitting next to me, looking up at me, going, "Well, I'm here." Yeah, that's really interesting. No, because I think very much the same, but you get it done, don't you? You get it done. That's the I mean, you've got 2 books, so that's pretty impressive. Yes.
I was going to ask, has anyone else in this group struggled with marking?
That's what I was about to ask.
I'm telling you, that's the hardest thing about it. Sometimes it takes me double or triple the time to mark one lesson compared to my counterparts. I hate marking. I have to do it, especially BTEC. It's lots of writing. And with my dyslexia as well, the spelling and grammar, doesn't help.
Mm.
So I resonate with you there, Pete, with doing things in chunks. I do a bit of marking, 10, 15 minutes, and then I go off, do another bit of marking, then go off. I can't just sit there and just knock it out.
I did the same. I was an AQA examiner for years, marking English literature papers, and I had to do that in exactly the same way. I mean, I hated it. The money was good, but I despised it. But I do, 2 or 3 papers and then just have to step away. Very slow way of doing it, unfortunately.
It's interesting because I was going to say that I absolutely resonate with the marking. I've got a class, I've got of essays I've got to do in history. They're huge. They're 45-minute essays. Yeah. And I carry it 2 from work back and forth. I did mark 2 of them today because I saw my colleagues of those. It's 2 weeks later. But what's interesting for me, Pete, different to you, I'm an Edexcel examiner, have been since 2016. I can knock those bad boys out. I don't know why, but something about it not being for my work and something about I don't have to give feedback. They don't, because my writing, dyslexic, it's I can't swear, it's not good. And my spelling is really bad. So something about, I just had to put a number on it. I find much easier and much quicker, and I can get through those. And the money is good, eh? Yeah.
Well, they made it hard.
Do enough of it is good.
The more of a system there is for marking, and the more I can use a little bit of a structure for feedback really, really helps. So having a rubric that is really clear in higher education, what's a first, what's a 2-1, and so on and so forth. And there's really clear kind of descriptions. And then I can kind of reword with some specific examples what they say in the box. And then I can get in a bit of a rhythm and just kind of keep going. But for me, when I have to switch tasks a lot, that's what takes my concentration away. My ability to actually do it quickly really goes when I also then have to go and teach a lesson, or I also have to do some writing or some other kind of task. But if I know I've got this amount of time and I can do Pomodoro method, 25 minutes, I can sometimes get quite quick by the end of a pile. And it's like practice.
What's been one of my friends as well, which is great, is erasable pens. Because with my dyslexia, I write notes on people's work, and then I think I shouldn't have written that, I should have written something else. So I can rub them out and start again, which is great. So if you haven't got an erasable pen, buy one of those. They're really good. They're very useful. Alternatively, what I do now for BTEC, unlike history, because mine is on computer, I use Google, so then I can put notes digitally on their work, which is great, and they can respond back to it. So it saves me a lot of headache as well. But obviously with history, it's written on paper. It's more difficult, isn't it?
It is. It is hard. I have to say that back to you, Amy. When I started at my current workplace, there weren't those structured sheets. And back to what skills we bring was the first thing I did. It's like, well, here's the mark scheme. Let's break it down. Let's get it into lines. Then we can just highlight the parts of the mark scheme. And I think we're very good at seeing what needs structure, what needs clarity. I think that's why there's so many of us in teaching that exist. Many of us who are undiagnosed still, vast majority. And I think that's one of by talking about this, we can see that's what we're good at. That's what we bring. We don't like the marking, but we're really setting up the structures for it.
And we're so good, I think, at explaining as well, because I know for me, it took me so long to work out what I thought about the topic and how to deal with it, that then actually all the different struggles that people have, I've pretty much had them all. So I can empathize with the struggle, and then I can find out what someone's dealing with and what particular struggle they're going through. And then I've got really kind of nuanced explanations and ways of dealing with it, because chances are I've experienced most of them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I must be that. I used to like the idea of marking, may I say.
Very different.
I used to get excited about the idea that I was going to see these absolute masterpieces, and then I used to just like throw them over my head because of what I'd end up by getting. You're going to think you're going to see back all of that effort you put into your teaching is going to be transposed onto this amazing were into these assignments, and it never was, unless they would get the odd gold one, which made it worth it. But I actually found it was more difficult when they put all the marking, particularly with the exam boards, because I used to mark for AQA and OCR, when they put them online.
Mm-hmm.
I found that much more draining. You know, being able to, no, you weren't meant to, but being able to go and sit in a coffee place and mark made it so much easier than having to do it online. But interesting, brilliant, great, guys. So moving on to just thinking about then in our where you work, or it could be in the broader sense in terms of thinking about education policy. What policies or practices do you think the education sector should implement to better, I say accommodate, I don't really like the word accommodate, but when we're not really at the point where a lot of education employers are compliant or just about compliant. So we'll say accommodate or affirm the neurodivergent workforce. So what policies or practices do you think the education sector should implement to better affirm the neurodivergent workforce? So that could be in terms of, well, firstly, recognising it, and also being able to kind of capitalise in a positive way. I don't mean to exploit those talents that you guys have just all shared. So I'm going to put this question to. I'm going to go straight back to you, Pete.
Yeah, well, I mean, if I had my way, there's about 1 billion things that I would set up pretty much immediately if somebody, you know, just dropped me into the Department of Education and said, right, come on, get on with it. I think that number one, there has to be far better training. I tend to spend the majority of my time banging on about how we need better training for the students' benefit, which we definitely do. Because people just don't know anything about autistic students, and that causes so many problems that we're seeing all the time. But also for the colleagues, you know, we need at the very least for middle managers and SLT teams to be really quite up to date and au fait with the, you know, ins and outs of neurodiversity. They need to have a much better understanding of autism. They need to have a much better understanding of ADHD, all the disses, you know, dyspraxia, dyslexia, dyscalculia. They need to know about this stuff, because unless they know about it, we will continue to have to spend the majority of our time exhaustedly explaining to them over and over again what it is, why we need what we need. And, you know, whilst we're kind of washed over with a feeling of imposter syndrome, and is it even okay for us to ask for this? And, oh, why am I having to explain all this again? It's exhausting. To not have to do that would improve things considerably, I think. If you knew that you could go up to your line manager and say, hey, look, you know, my sensory overwhelm's really in a pickle at the moment, you know, for various reasons. And they were just like, oh, yeah, that makes sense, you know, because I've learned about sensory overwhelm for neurodivergent people and I know what you're talking about. That would help a great deal. But on top of that, there also has to be some very specific levels and types of protection put in place for this particular subset of disability. Because at the moment, I don't think that really exists. So if you are, for example, having real difficulty negotiating and navigating the school politics, you know, the office politics of the school, because you're autistic and nothing makes any sense because it's all weird, neurotypical ambiguity, you know, going on everywhere. You're not protected. You are exposed and vulnerable as somebody who is not able to kind of engage in that you know, cloak and dagger stuff. If you're ADHD and you are really struggling to mark, that is not something that's protected. The best we tend to hope for, I mean, all I got, for example, when I was off on long-term sick was, you know, being offered, well, you know, we can accept you having more days off a year than we usually do. You know, we can offer that to you. And it's like, well, I mean, I'd rather things be dealt with in the classroom, you know, and I'd rather feel safer and more secure in my job than just feel like I can have a few more days off a year without being told off. I could go on about this for a very long time, but I'll limit it at that. I think training and proper employment protection would be top of my list.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a kind of great opening into it, really. Certainly in terms of the public sector equality duty. Public sector and funded employers have an obligation in terms of the general duty to ensure that they put things in place to ensure that there isn't any kind of disadvantage or discrimination. But really, we should really be at a point where we're on our way to being more kind of neurodiversity affirming organisations by just things about just thinking about applying those universal design principles in the setup, with where classrooms are laid out, how the equipment in classrooms, things like that, timetabling. And those things are still not happening. I'm going to open this up to the floor rather than pick on anyone, because it's a policy question. Some people like them, some people don't. So if anyone would like to jump in and say anything about,
I'm gonna just touch on what Pete said about training, because as an ECT, when I was doing my teacher training, there was literally nothing at all. We have an ECT in my department at the moment, and I've asked him. He's going to be on my panel tomorrow, and I've asked him about training and that kind of stuff, and he's neurodiverse as well. And again, it's still not there, So when it comes to training, it's not also just the ECTs. I've done training in my school for teachers in our CPD evenings, afternoons, and the amount of teachers said to me, "Do you know what? I've learned so much today, which now I sort of understand the students." My school, to be fair, is actually very good with neurodiversity. My head teacher is neurodiverse. He's a very good guy, and he's very accommodating in regards to, they do a walk in school, so part of the SLT team, and they come around to ask teachers, actually, are you okay? Do you need 5 minutes? I'll cover the class 5 minutes, go and have a cup of tea, because my school there's a lot of behavior in my school which can be challenging. We've got a high number of SEN, a lot of EAL and PP students. So he's sort of identified that, teachers do need support as well. That's really great. And so I think you're right. The policy should be from, the powers that be, that as an education environment, you need to have both ends of it. So we need to have specific training for teachers as part of your CPD, as well as specific sections in the ECT handbook where they're talking about neurodiverse students, and also with the parents, because what is a challenge as well, sometimes when you're trying to challenge or have issues with the actual student, their parents are neurodiverse as well. So trying to get through to them is going to be the challenge. So you've got two challenges there as well. So having to understand how to interact with neurodiverse parents, that's going to be a thing that does not happen at all, I think, at the moment. I don't see it happening really at all. So that's definitely something that needs to be put in the policy. And then what's been great for myself as well, which I think I am propping my school because I think they've done very well currently, is that I applied for access to work, and the school was very accommodating with that. And so I've got a double screen on my laptop at school, so I can, because I've got so many tabs. Trust me, I've got tabs open everywhere, and I think most ADHD people do have tabs everywhere. So now I've got access to work arrangements. I've got the tablet. I can put it on my laptop. I can carry it around. It helps me. I've had other things put onto my computer for work that assist me with dyslexia and ADHD, that kind of stuff. So again, it's making sure that schools allow the teachers to understand that it is available, because a lot of teachers do not know it's available and how to actually apply for it. So that's another thing which I think needs to change in the policy. And then access arrangements for students, because I've had a lot of parents, now it's come to GCSE, my kid is really struggling with this. What can I do? How can I help? Teachers and SLT need to understand that we need to do it earlier. So it doesn't start from year 9 when they're just back to GCSE. It's got to start from year 8. First year they getting engrossed and understand what school's about. Year 8 you should know who's got a low reason age, who's dyslexic, that kind of stuff. Now working on supporting those students. So that's what I'm doing in my school at the moment. I've got a group of year 8 boys, which I'm going to start working with hopefully in a couple of weeks, who maybe either ADHD, neurodiverse, or undiagnosed, and working with those to try and get them between year 8 to year 10 ready to understand how their brains work, how they can access the learning. And I think that's some of the policies put in place.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Amy? Oh, I'm Ruth then.
Yeah, so I think that it's really difficult in organizations when well-meaning colleagues are trying to kind of look after a variety of different groups, you know, diversity in terms of race, in terms of neurodiversity, in terms of socioeconomic privilege, in terms of all these things, all these characteristics, all these varieties of ways of being human. And for me, it can sometimes be a little bit overwhelming. I noticed that other educators find all of these various groups very overwhelming. So I really like the trauma-informed educational principles, because well, first of all, suspect that a lot of us have trauma that we're not aware of. That was what happened to me, and what came out of my research, and also with the clients that I work with, a lot of them really just aren't aware of the trauma that they have. And I suspect, although it's difficult to prove it because this research is just sort of starting, that actually students and staff and that just people have, you know, variety of coping mechanisms with trauma. And so the SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, in 2014 published some guidelines about kind of trauma-informed education, and they really fit with a lot of things that everyone's saying so far, which is to create a sense of safety, to have trustworthiness and transparency, to create opportunities for peer support, to foster a kind of culture of collaboration and mutuality, to provide aspects of empowerment, voice and choice, and then to really embrace and look to understand cultural, historical, and gender issues. And those are the 6 kind of guidelines for SAMHSA's trauma-informed anything. And I feel that can be a really good platform from which to kind of try and help everyone, staff, students, neurodiverse, various different ethnic or socioeconomic difficulties, and variety of people.
That's great. Thank you, Amy. That's something to so the trauma informed. I think that's an interesting. I don't know much about that model myself, but that sounds like that's something worth exploring. I want to come to Ruth in terms of that question, and then we're going to finish with one in terms of what would you tell any neurodivergent trainee teachers or anyone who's thinking about going into training. But let's hear from Ruth first.
So, I think in terms of just being accommodating, I think there are some quite simple adaptations that schools can make that are actually really, really helpful. I also think that there's a bigger issue of ensuring that the culture is accommodating, and I'm genuinely really lucky with where I work. So I've been here for 9 years, and about, I think 7 years ago, I was now deputy head when we need an induction program for new staff. And when I reflect on that, I think, actually, if you're neurodivergent and you move to a new workplace, you're sort of expected to know everything. And although we're all teachers, every school is different. And so actually having a really clear induction program where all your tech's set up in advance, you're not arriving on day one expected to get everything in place on top of a back-to-back day of inset. I think that actually is really, really helpful. And in addition to that, having a member of SLT who's sort of in charge of that, and who's someone that is trustworthy and emotionally intelligent that any member of staff can go to really, but particularly if you're neurodivergent. I think that can be really, really helpful. So yeah, setting up those systems, making it really clear this is what's expected. And I think in terms of like perfectionist tendencies, I mean, I sometimes try and do everything perfectly, and I've had to learn that that's not always needed. And I think if that's set out from the outset, that this is what the priorities are, that's also really helpful. I think that's where a school having a really clear strategy is also really, really important, so that you've not got like 6 or 7 members of senior leadership saying like these 5 things are important, and then you've got like 50 things that you're trying to do. And again, I'm really lucky with that because we've got a really clear strategy of what we're trying to achieve where I work. And I think those systems make it a lot easier to prioritize. So I think that in terms of the culture is important. And then just like simple changes. So for example, if I'm in a meeting and then I'm expected to do a task that's individual to me, for example, working on a scheme of work, like if I'm in a room with colleagues who are maybe chatting or collaborating, I just cannot concentrate. So just having like an understanding head of department where I can remove myself from the room and get on with that task, that's really, really helpful. But again, that requires you to have that trust. But yeah, I think small adaptations, being sent documents in advance of meetings so you can read them through if you're processing slightly slower. So quite simple things to do. They don't cost money, they don't necessarily cost time, but they allow schools to recognise, actually, yeah, we know you might find this a bit harder, but it's just good practice anyway to do those things, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's kind of like you do have to have a process that goes through every layer of a school, a college, university, really, and there has to be a clear policy and process that everyone knows about, and that will stop, the systemic failure that sometimes happens. If you put a reasonable adjustment request in and then it gets stuck somewhere and there is no one overseeing any of that. So that it fits into the accommodating area. And we, as I said, we want to kind of move from that. So that's all. Yeah, these are all amazing, brilliant points. And I think this is going to be really inspiring for anyone who's actually listens back on this. So, yes, Amy.
I just want to say I love those practical solutions, not only because of how much they would help everyone in this room, presumably, but also how much they help everyone.
Yeah.
And I think that's that's where this kind of, it does need to be adapted, that the kind of the ways that we do things aren't a one size fit all exactly, but sort of building up a culture of curiosity and interest in what people are finding helpful and not helpful just generally useful across the board.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, we've got 10 minutes to go. So what I want us to do is just maybe share some like final thoughts, and it can be, around if there's anyone out there who's thinking about who's neurodivergent, thinking about going into teaching, as we all know, is a profession that's very overwhelming as it is. But, what's the one piece of advice that you would give them? So if like maybe go round in order on that. So I'm going to start at the bottom. Georgia.
No, start with someone else. I'm thinking.
No, no worries. Ruth.
Okay. I think honesty is really important, and I think that if there's somebody within the leadership team where a trainee can say, I've got ADHD or whatever it might be, and have some strategies that help you that will be useful. And that, I guess, if you're training, you might not know what the difficulties might be within an education system, but you might know, for example, that you struggle with noise disturbance, or like having lots of things thrown at you at once and knowing what to prioritize. So I think if you can write a list of things that you find helpful in your day-to-day life, and then you can sit with a mentor and work through how that might translate into an education setting, and then come up with some quick wins. So for example, if they are able to go through like the school calendar with you, and give you lots of like advance warning about assessment deadlines and things like that. So yeah, just being able to approach someone within the setting and say, this is what I might find hard. This is what I know works for me in my day-to-day life with these things. How could that transfer across to an education setting and come up with solutions? And if you do that early on, I think you're on to a winner potentially.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great piece of advice. So what I'm going to do is, rather than pick on individuals, just open it up to the floor and see if anyone wants to add anything to that. Just, yes, Amy.
I think my feeling is that to choose a subject to teach in that you absolutely love and find completely fascinating, because that is what has carried me through challenges and ups and downs, is that it's, you know, it's a special interest. It's an area that I'm endlessly curious about, and you can't bore me with it. So that's both a challenge sometimes and a complete strength, because, you know, the thing they say about teaching that's the most important aspect, enthusiasm, that is the number one, you know, attribute of teachers that students recognize as the most important thing. So being able to do something that you can bring that love of it to the students, and can accept their, you know, their queries, their questions, their hesitations, but meet it with passion. That's the tip I have.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, Pete. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say I wrote a whole chapter of a book on that very topic. It's a good book. It's called Learning from Autistic Teachers. It's on JKP. It's worth reading. It's just a bunch of neurodivergent teachers writing a chapter each, and I wrote about how, if I hadn't had a special interest in English, you know, in Victorian literature, in ghost stories, in, you know, that kind of thing, then there's no way I would have lasted as long as I did. Absolutely no way. And I knew that because whenever I was teaching something I didn't care about, like English language, exam skills, for example, I found that like pulling teeth. I hated that. Whereas if I woke up in the morning thinking, oh, I'm doing the signalman today with year 10, yes, get it, you know, and I'd almost bounce to school, which for me is quite unusual. So that I think can't be. It's interesting how many of us here actually, I mean, I did do an English degree, but how many of us here have actually kind of found a subject that isn't the one that you bored yourself silly with at university? You know, you've kind of gone elsewhere and you've found something that actually, yeah, probably piques your interest even more than what you studied at uni. And I wonder how many neurodivergent teachers actually have that experience, you know, of, you know, because after 3 or 4 years at uni, you get bored, don't you, potentially? So maybe, you know, finding something new is something that a lot of us do, perhaps.
I'm going to add on that as well. I think all of you said it perfectly right, because being someone with ADHD, what I learned when I did my ADHD training course to be a training ADHD coach, ADHD people have an interest-based neurosystem. So if you're not interested in it, you're not going to want to do it. So if you're interested in it, you can do it for as many hours as God can give. Yeah, with me, with business studies, I did my degree in architecture, but business studies for me is my passion. So I can teach it, talk about it forever, so to speak. And other 3 things I'm going to point out is be your authentic self, be who you are. That's one thing I'm going to say, because that's what I try to do. Get to know your students. Create a teacher folder. Who's neurodiverse? Who's got reading age of 8, and then in year 13, for example. Get to know your students. That's going to really help you out. And then lastly, use your second brain. Your second brain basically is your diary or your phone or your teacher folder, so you can write notes. My teacher folder is full of post-it notes. Every lesson I have a post-it note for what I need to do when I start a lesson. Then I have notes for what I did at the end of the lesson. So when I start my next lesson, I know where I ended. That's my second brain. So it helps me out immensely, because I will forget all the time. But they're my 4 key points there.
Excellent.
I'm ready now.
Yeah, brilliant. Go.
So, I would say thank you for everyone, because you helped me out listening to you. So that was quite interesting to see that I needed to have some time. I was like, I don't know. But listening to you, I can now come up with my response. So I think we've just modelled quite good there about the importance of students being able to say, like I did, I'm not ready. What was I going to say? Oh, yes. So for me, I would say, I shouldn't have said anything. To me, I would say leaning to your strengths. So I think quite often we can view our neurodivergence as negative. We've got to think about what's positive about what we do. And for me, I'm similar to you, Isaac. I have tons of notes. And my strength, I think, when I was training was my planning. Yes, deep diving. I love my history. I love my history. But the other thing is, well, before I move on, is making sure you're planning. And don't worry, like I used to get a lot of stick for my over planning. I used to have 2-page lesson plans. I had those for years, and I still, like you, Isaac, still have my lesson plan. I've been teaching forever. I have to have a clear PowerPoint. I have to have all my notes. It's fine. It's like the scaffolding we give to students. The scaffolding's not going to go for me, and that's absolutely fine. So lean in so you know what works. And then if you're in a subject where you might have to teach outside of your subject, that's a nightmare. I've taught geography, I've taught RE, that's really hard. I would say the other thing is to see what else is in the school or college environment that you could get involved in that is something that you love. Extracurricular, sports sessions, study sessions. Do you want to be a tutor? I love being a tutor. So try and balance out the things we don't want to have to teach with things that we're really passionate about, and then we can shine in those areas. And hopefully maybe the geography lessons, geographers, hopefully the geography lessons could be taken off the timetable and you can do the things that you're passionate about. Because like I think it was you, Pete, who said, but we have our special interests and that's where we shine. So let us do them. And if you show yourself shining in those special interests, hopefully we can excel in that area.
Excellent. I think that's brilliant. There's a shine. Yeah, absolutely. People should be, we should be able to shine in those kind of special interests. And I loved all of those, all of the answers to that last question. I think this is going to be particularly inspiring for anyone watching this, just going through all of that. And I just wanted to say, I can't believe we're smashing this. We're actually going to finish this on time, which I can't actually believe. Excellent. So I just want to thank you all, and I just want to thank you for sharing your ideas, being so open and transparent. And I think that's really important. And I think we need to kind of keep these discussions going. I'm very interested in reading both books, obviously, Pete. But it's great. We need to keep this discussion going, keep the spotlight on this, and then hopefully in the future we will have a session in which we are purely talking about sharing ideas and not having to focus a lot on the challenges due to structural and cultural. So I just want to thank you all. And thank you to the audience. I know we've got quite a few people watching. No questions, but there may be some things that come up later. So that's it. Brilliant. Have a great evening, and thank you all. That has been absolutely. And I know I've been coughing through it, so apologies for that. But I'm buzzing. It's nothing to do with the paracetamol either. It's to do with this conversation. So thank you all. I'll stop.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Nice
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.